take it like a man. Big boys don't cry. Keep a stiff upper lip. Don't be a sissy. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. You are useless as tits on a boar.
That's my dad talking to me as a kid. My dad and I, two angry men. My dad died of anger. He was raging against a man who'd sold him a bum car, and he had a chest hemorrhage and died. But before that, anger had taken his life south. Anger had alienated his wife from him, caused his children to hate him and wish that he would die, and had alienated him and left him isolated and alone. And I was on my way down a similar anger path until I learned some of the things I want to talk to you about today. I guess I'm taking it all off here. I'd like to talk to you about men and anger and some of the solutions that I've come up with in my own life. The first question is, why is it that so many men are angry? And I think the answer to that is that we are cut off from our hearts. We lack an inner life. Fundamentally, it's a relationship problem. And the relationship that has a problem is my relationship with me. Angry men have learned to have a cruel relationship with themselves. Leading psychologist Terence Real has stated that 50% of men are at least covertly depressed. And he stated that those depressed men are angry men, and that he has never met a depressed man that did not have a cruel relationship with himself. The problem is that many of our fathers have taught us that our hearts don't matter, that we are what we do. We are not human beings, children of God, just intrinsically valuable. They've taught us that we must be breadwinners, we must be performers. We are not human beings, we are human doings. We are hollow men, like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, who has no heart. And we trudge off to work every day in the forest, afraid that if we are in touch with our hearts, if we cry, we, like the Tin Man, will rust, and we will be stuck in the forest forever with our axe upraised, waiting for Dorothy to take us to the wizard who will give us a heart. But of course, you remember at the end of the movie, the wizard said to the Tin Man, you always had a heart, just look inside. But we fail to see what's inside. Psychologist Ron Labatt has told us that 80% of men suffer from alexithymia. We don't have the ability to identify exactly what it is that we feel. So you may be a physicist that understands all the secrets of the cosmos, and I may be a lawyer who understands 200 years of common law, and at night we can go home and not know whether that big feeling inside us is sadness or loneliness or embarrassment. Doctors tell us that so many men are cut off from their feelings that we actually ignore the pain that we have in our bodies, and we don't get diagnosed for the problems that sometimes kill us. And doctors have also told us that our suppression of our feelings, the suppression of our hearts, is connected to the fact that men have double the heart attack rate of women, 4 times the suicide rate, double the alcoholism rate, 9 times the rate of ulcers compared to women. Because women tend to be more in touch with their feelings, work through their feelings, share their feelings with others, and relieve the stress. Whereas men tend to internalize that stress and eventually become angry. So why is it that so many men, especially men of my generation, are cut off from their feelings? For centuries, fathers have taught us that we are to suppress our vulnerable feelings and to convert them into anger and into power. We were admonished, like you heard, that big boys don't cry. We were admonished to take it like a man, keep a stiff upper lip, don't be a pansy, don't be a mama's boy, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. We as men in the comic books learned that Superman was a man of steel, faster than an airplane, more powerful than a locomotive. Life's bullets bounced off his chest. But remember what Superman's father said to him. He said, "You must not let your enemies see Clark Kent. Don't let them see your vulnerable side, or they will destroy you." And so we learn to deny our Clark Kent side. We deny our sadness, our fear, our embarrassment. And instead, many of us learn to convert those vulnerable feelings into anger, because it gave us power over others. Traditionally, the angry man became king. After all, King George V, Queen Elizabeth's grandfather, put it well. He said, "My father was frightened of his father, I was frightened of my father, and by God, my children will be frightened of me." And you wonder why the royal family screwed up. But they were kind of an archetype of the traditional patriarchal family, where the father was the master of the house. 50% of Americans believe that the father should be master of the house still. And in that patriarchal family, fathers speak harshly to sons. And here's the key to anger, is that the sons learn to speak harshly to themselves. They develop that cruel relationship with self. The cruelty of the father-son patriarchal relationship is mirrored inside me. It's mirrored in the relationship that I have with my inner child. Ultimately, we men learn to hide our hearts that we view as shameful, to have contempt for our feelings, to turn our fear and sadness into anger, and to cry bullets instead of tears. But there is a way out. We can heal my cruel relationship with myself. And I learned this at a great cost in a divorce when my life was going sideways. And I went to a counselor, and I was talking about what was going on in my life, and I said, "I screwed this up. I'm stupid. I'm a fake. I just can't do anything right." And he said to me, "Stop. Who is that talking?" And I thought, oh, I don't know if I have an answer to this. I was kind of stumped. Was it God? Was it me? No, it was my dad. And I realized that all through decades, I'd been ruled by a harsh stranger inside my head. But with the counselor's help, under light hypnosis, I learned to say goodbye to my father and then to create a kind father for myself. I tried to talk to myself in the encouraging, patient, nurturing way that I'd seen Bill Cosby talk to Theo. Right? We should all have Bill Cosby. Or the way that Mr. Helms, this grandfatherly figure at my church, spoke to me. Or actually, the way that my mother, a very loving person, spoke to me. My mother, just to give you an idea, at the end of her life, the last words to her children as she was on her deathbed was she rose up and said, "Children, there are so many things in the world to love. Look for them." So I want that voice in my head. I don't want the thing about you're useless as tits in the water. So I started a routine, a habit of going for a walk on the beach and just talking with my kind father and imagining, like the carpenter from Nazareth, my mother, Mr. Helms from the church, walking with me. I did this when the neighbors weren't around. And just, I would say, I made a mistake at work yesterday. I snapped at my daughter yesterday. I screwed up the TED Talk. And my dad would say, you're useless as tits on a board, you're a slack ass, all that kind of stuff. But the kind father says to me, well, you made a mistake at work, but you worked really hard. I respect you. I appreciate the effort you're making. I know you made a mistake in stamping of your daughter, but I really respect the fact that you're trying to change the way that you're dealing with your daughter. I want to encourage you. You screwed up the TED Talk. Well, that was a big screw up, but never get that chance again. But there'll be other opportunities. You can play guitar down at the Spiral Camp. Gives me what the kids of healthy parents get. How many people have healthy parents out there? Not many, probably, but there are some. There are some. And what you got was your parents gave you unconditional love and support. They told you it was okay to have feelings, okay to have a tender heart, have that vulnerability. And they gave you this kind self-talk. You learned how to describe the world differently to yourself. And I learned that no matter where I was or what happened in the world, I can always go inside to a safe sanctuary. I don't have to look for praise and comfort from other people. I can give that to myself. And my inner world becomes not a country of resentment, not a country of anger, but a country of love. And my relationship with myself is healed. I learned to be my own best friend. This is a very important lesson for us. I learned to accept myself and my feelings. And once I accept those feelings and process them, I learned I can actually pass through that. I don't have to convert that into anger at somebody else. I can just have a good cry. I hadn't cried for decades, and I realized, I thought if I cried, I would die. Who would have thought? It's actually kind of fun. It's rejuvenating, it's refreshing. And I also learned life's sweet secret, which is that sorrow can be an opportunity. Sorrow builds a bridge between two human beings. And you know this yourself, that some of the times in your life that have been the most real and the most precious have been when you've been in grief and you've shared that with somebody who really sat with you and listened with you. So I've learned that opening up to the heart can be a time of reality, of connection, a precious, precious time. And at the end of this whole process of becoming a kind father to myself, allowing myself to feel, and processing those feelings, that led me back to my heart. But more importantly, it led me back to my father's tender heart. And in my book, Becoming the Kind Father, I wrote the following. Forgiving Dad. For a long time, I hated my dad, and I didn't forgive him. I hated him for his drinking, for his rages, his vulgarity, for walking around the house in his underwear, for peeing in the bathroom sink, for scaring me. When I was 13, I wished he would die, and then he did. I thought I had killed him. For 15 years, I never mentioned his name to anyone. Applying kids' magical thinking, I was scared to death I might kill someone else with mere thoughts. For the longest time, I couldn't forgive myself. I was scared to death that I would damage someone else. But I'm healing, and as I write this chapter and explore the idea of forgiveness, I think of Dad. His father died at about the time that boys are first forbidden to feel their emotions, at age 5. Publicly humiliated by his preacher grandfather in front of the congregation at 14, then running away from home and living on his own, adventuring to Alaska, becoming a bush pilot, later a glad-handing California salesman, a Willie Loman, a man's man, a man finally undone by unemployment, drinking, and failure. Dad never took the first step towards forgiveness. He never got in touch with his own pain, never knew how to process his own tender feelings. Instead, he took the anger path and forced those unwanted feelings onto us. He blamed himself for feeling forbidden pain, then quickly shifted that blame onto us. He took us all to live in the country of resentment. Eventually, Dad drank and blamed the forbidden feelings away, and he killed himself in the process. But he wasn't always like that. A memory returns. It was evening at the river. I was 5 and Dad was still young and strong. We were camping in the California Coast Range. Although I couldn't swim, I had wandered down to the river after dinner and paddled an inner tube out to the middle of the big dark pool. I lay back in that inner tube, gazing at the cliff that loomed above on the other side of the water. Suddenly, I slipped through the middle of the tube and I was in the water, struggling. I sank into the cold, dark water. As I struggled to the surface, I could see my dad running down the beach, tearing off his shoes and plunging powerfully into the river. Then I was under again, swallowing cold water, sinking into blackness. In a moment, I was pushed powerfully to the surface. He had come up below me, pushing me to the air. As I gasped for air, he rose like a sea lion on the surface below me, and I was saved. But then he swallowed water and began to cough and struggle himself. "Dad," I cried in a panic. He sank below me, and I again fell back into the black waters, gulping and sputtering, stepping on his head. As we sank together, the murky yellow light of the world receded into darkness, with no sound but my thundering heartbeat. I felt his hands grip my calves and place my feet firmly on his shoulders. Then, as in the game we had often played, he drifted down and bounced back up from the river bottom, thrusting me to the surface. And then his tattooed arm was around my chest, towing me to safety, keeping my face above the water. He coughed and murmured, "It's okay, Cal, it's okay." Finally, we staggered onto the little sandy beach, and Dad hugged me. As I stood gasping, shivering, and crying, he hugged me to his heaving chest. Then he went over and got a towel out of the trailer and wrapped it around me. Later, as he heated hot chocolate on the Coleman stove, he did the unusual. He sat me on his lap. After a while, he turned the Giants game on the radio, and we sipped hot chocolate while the sun sank behind the cliff. By the end, I think Dad, like me, had totally forgotten that day. He forgot his goodness. I wish that when he ruminated on his failures, he had been able to remember the good things. I wish that when he thought of his years of unemployment, his bankruptcy, the jalopies he drove, his failed marriages, his destructive anger, he had been able to recall that day on the river. Most of all, I wish that he had had a kind father to remind him of the good things about himself. His sense of humor, his charm, his ability to spin a story for a crowd, his compassion for the unfortunate, his intelligence, his ability to make a day's outing with a young boy into an exciting adventure. I wish that Dad had understood that he was no different than any of us, a mixture of good and bad. I wish that someone had told him he didn't have to be a superhero, he was simply human. I wish Dad had realized that he could be forgiven and that he could forgive. The fact was, he didn't have to die alone in the country of resentment. There was room for him in the country of love.